Chapter 18, The Circus and the Royal Nonsuch. I went to the circus and loafed around the back side till the watchman went by. Then I dived into an under the tent. I had some money, but I reckoned I better save it. No telling how soon you're going to need it, away from home and among strangers. I'm not against spending money on a circus when there's no other way to get in, but there's no one wasting on them. It was a real bully circus. It was a splendid sight to see them all come riding in, two and two, gentlemen and ladies side by side, the men resting their hands on their thighs so easy. There must have been 20 of them, and every lady with a lovely complexion and perfectly beautiful. They looked just like a gang of sure enough queens. Then, one by one, they got up and stood on their horses and went weaving around the ring, so gentle and wavy and graceful. The men looked ever so tall and airy and straight, with their heads bobbing and skimming along the way up there under the tent roof, and every lady looking the most lovely parasol with her rosy leaf dresses and flapping soft and silky around her hips. Then, faster and faster they went, all of them dancing, first one foot in the air and then the other. The horses went leaning more and more, the ringmaster cracking his whip and shouting, "Hi, hi," and so, one after the other, they skipped off into the ring and made the sweetest bow and went running out. Everybody clapped and went wild. And all the clown was carrying on so, it almost killed the people. The ringmaster couldn't say a word, but the clown was back at him quick as a wink. How he ever could think of so many funny things to say, and so sudden and so pat, was what I couldn't understand. I couldn't have thought of them in a year. By and by, a drunk man tried to get into the ring, said he wanted to ride, said he could ride as well as anybody. The ringmaster argued and tried to keep him out, but he wouldn't listen. The whole show had to come to a standstill. Then the people hollered at him and made fun of him. That made him mad, and he commenced to rip and tear. That stirred up the people, and a lot of men commenced to pile down off the benches and went swarming out towards the ring, saying, "Knock him down, throw him out." Some women screamed. Then the ringmaster made a little speech. He said he hoped there wouldn't be any disturbance. If the man would promise not to make any more trouble, he would let him ride, if he could stay on the horse. So everybody laughed and said all right, and the man got on. The minute he was on, the horse began to rip and tear and jump around. It was all two circus men could do to hang on to the bridle. The drunk man grabbed the horse around the neck to hold on, and his heels went flying in the air at every jump. The whole crowd stood up and shouted and laughed till the tears rolled down. Then, in spite of all the circus men could do, the horse broke loose. Away he went, round and round the ring, with that sawed hanging to his neck, with first one leg nearly to the ground on one side, and then the other on the other side. The people just went crazy. It wasn't funny to me, for all a tremble at his danger, but pretty soon he struggled up and grabbed the bridle, reeling this way and that. The next minute he dropped the bridle and stood up on the horse, and the horse going like a house afire all the time. He stood up there and went sailing around as easy as if he never had been drunk in his life. Then he began to pull off his clothes and sling them. He shed them so fast they seemed to clog the air. Altogether he shed 17 suits, and there he was slim and handsome and dressed the gaudiest and prettiest you ever see. Then he lit into the horse with his whip and made him fairly hum. Finally, he skipped off the horse, made a bow, and danced off to the dressing room. Everybody was just howling with pleasure and surprise. When the ringmaster saw he had been fooled, he was the sickest man you ever saw. I felt sheepish enough to be taken in, but I wouldn't have done it in the ringmaster's place for $1,000. Why, as one of his own men. He had got up that joke and never let on to anybody. Well, that night we had our show. Only about 12 people there, just enough to pay expenses. And they laughed all the time, and that made the Duke mad. Everybody left before the show was over, but one boy who was asleep. So the Duke said these Arkansas lunkheads couldn't come up to Shakespeare. What they wanted was something worse than low comedy. He said he could judge their style. Next morning, he got some big sheets of wrapping paper and some black paint and made big handbills that said, "At the courthouse, 3 nights only, the world-famous actors, David Garrick the Younger and Edmund Kean the Elder of London, and their thrilling tragedy, The Royal Nonsuch. Admission 50 cents. Ladies and children not admitted." There, he said, if the last line won't bring them in, I don't know, Arkansas. We stuck the show bells up all over the village, and that night the house was jammed full of men in no time. When the place couldn't hold any more, the Duke quit tending the door and went around the back way and walked out on the stage. He stood up before the curtain and made a little speech. He praised up the show, said it was the most thrillingest one that ever was. He bragged about Edmund Kean, the elder, who was to play the main part in it. At last, when we had got everybody's interest high enough, he rolled up the curtain. The next minute, the king pranced out on all fours, naked, painted all over, ring streaks and stripes, in all sorts of colors. It was just wild, but it was awful funny. The most killed themselves, laughing at the king capering around on the stage. And when he capered off behind the scenes, they roared and clapped and stormed in haw-hawed till he had to come back and do it all again. Then they made him do it another time. It would make a cow laugh to see the shines that old idiot cut. Then the Duke let the curtain down and bowed to the people. He said he was glad the show had pleased them, and would they tell their friends to come and see it tomorrow night. 20 people yelled out, "What? Is it over? Is that all?" The Duke said yes. Then everybody cried out, "Sold," and they rose up mad and started for the stage. But a big, fine-looking man jumped on the bench and shouted, "Hold on, just a word, gentlemen. They stopped to listen. We are sold, badly sold, but we don't want to be laughingstock with this whole town. Let's all go out of here quiet and talk this show up, and tell the rest of the town. Then we'll all be in the same boat. Isn't that sensible?" "You bet it is. The judge is right." "All right then, not a word about being sold. Go along home and advise everybody to come and see the show tomorrow night." The next night, the house was jammed again, and we sold this crowd the same way. The third night, the house was crammed again. I stood by the Duke at the door and saw the people go in. Every man had his pockets bulging or something muffled up under his coat. I smelled sickly eggs by the barrel and rotten cabbages. And if I knew the smell of a dead cat, 64 of them went in. Well, when the place was full, the Duke handed a quarter to a fellow to tend door for a minute. Then he started around for the stage door. I after him. The minute we turned the corner, he said, "Walk fast now till you get away from the town, and then strike out for the raft like the Dickens was after you." We both did and got to the raft at the same time. In less than 2 seconds, the raft was gliding downstream, dark and still. I reckon the poor king was in for a bad time, left to face all the people alone, but nothing of the sort. Pretty soon he crawled from under the wigman and said, "Well, how did the show pan out this time, Duke?" He hadn't been in town at all. He didn't show a light up 10 miles below the town. When we lit up and had supper, the king and the Duke fairly laughed their bones loose over the way that served the people in the town. The Duke said, "Greenhorns, flatheads, I know they would lay for us the third night, they'd think. Now it is our turn. I would give anything to know how they're taking it." The king and the Duke took in $465 in the 3 nights. I never saw money hauled in the wagon load like that before. By and by, when Jim heard them snoring, he said, "Don't it surprise you the way them kings carries on, Huck?" "No," I said. "I reckon they're all alike. But Huck, these kings of ourn is regular rapscallions. Dat is just the way they is, Huck. They is regular rapscallions." That's what I said. All kings are mostly rapscallions, as far as I can make out. Is that so? You read about them once, you'll see. Look at Henry VIII. This one is Sunday school superintendent to him. My, you ought to have seen old Henry VIII when he was in bloom. He was a blossom. He used to marry a new wife every day and chop her head off next morning. He made every one of them tell him a tale every night and kept that up till they had 1,001 tales. Then he put them all in a book and called it Doomsday Book. You don't know kings, Jim, but I know them, and his old rip of ours is one of the cleanest I ever heard in history. Well, King Henry, he took a notion to get up some troubles in this country. He heaves all the tea in Boston Harbor overboard and whacks out a Declaration of Independence and dares them to come on. That was the kind of bug Henry was. He would have fooled that town a heap worse than our kings did. You have to make allowances for kings. Take them all around. They are a mighty orny lot. But this one do smell. So like the nation, Huck. Well, they all do, Jim. You can't help the way a king smells. Now the Duke, he's a likely man in some ways. This one is a hard lot for a Duke. When he's a drunk, a nearsighted man couldn't tell him from a king. Well, anyways, I don't hanker for no more of them. This is all I can stand. I feel the same way, Jim. We have them on our hands. Sometimes I wish we could hear of a country that is out of kings.